Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9:01. We're here in the Flagler County Bureau of County Commissioners room. If you would all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pete Army. And now, as we always do before a meeting, I'd like you to join me in a moment of silence where we think about the good fortune that we have being here in Flagler County and the good fortune to be in the free state of Florida. And take a minute to think about our first responders, our sheriff and his people, our fire chief and his people, and the men and women of the armed forces around the world. Please join me. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a lot of business to get done today. We've got a few budgets to get through. I believe we're going to start with the sheriff. Ms. Petito, is that correct?
Actually, we were going to run through it, and then as we go through them, I'll actually start presenting them, and then they're here to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, super.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Real quickly, we'll go over this. As you know, we work very closely with our constitutional officers with the development of their budgets. They all do a remarkable job for the residents of Flagler County, and I truly value their partnership and thank them all for being here today. This is the agenda for today's budget workshop. We're going to go over each one of these items in a little bit more detail, but let's get started with the constitutional officers' budget requests for 2024. So, as you know, when we started the budget guidelines with you back in December, and we got a feel for how the board wanted to see the budgets presented. We were trying to roll out more common way of looking at everything. So the guidelines that were provided to the constitutional officers was the same that's provided to your board staff. Budget submittals represent the needs of the individual offices, and they include necessary FRS rates, which are outside of our control. We talked a little bit about the COLA at the last meeting and how we calculate that based on the March numbers, whether it's year over year or 12-month average. But this year, everybody applied the COLA rate of 5.3%. And then we asked that they all submit detailed budgets so that we could have a better understanding of the needs of each one of their offices. And then we internally consider any requests above that base budget in the form of a decision unit, which is the guidance that the board had provided back in December. And it's similar to what we're doing, or it's the exact same thing of what we're doing on the board side of the budget. So that was pretty much the guidance that was provided to them early on. And so we'll get started looking at the overall summary of all of your constitutional officers. So the first column that you have is the one-time enhancement. That's the money that was given to them after the adopted budget. As you recall, there was a shortfall in some of the offices with changes from either the state, whether they're unfunded mandates, whether it be outgoing personnel that maybe they had a high retirement cost that they had to cover. Some of it could have been for equipment that they were purchasing. So that first column represents the one-time enhancements that were given out in fiscal year 23. And then that second column is what was adopted. So the one-time enhancement isn't part of the adopted. It was part of that cash carry forward process. It's what makes up their amended budget. The third column over represents what they're requesting for next year. And then the next column is the amount of change, whether it went up or down. In this case, they all went up. And then the increase by percentage. And that increase is based on the adopted budget versus what they're requesting. And that's just a summary of all of those. So if you look at the adopted budget for '23, the total amount provided to the constitutional officers was $47.7 million, approximately, and that is scheduled to go up, if you look at all of their requests, going up to $54.8 million. So that's a $7.1 million increase over last year's budget request. Represents a 14.9% increase. When you look at we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more detail, so you'll see a breakdown of each one. So actually, I think the first one up is the clerk of court, if they follow the same order. Okay, so this is the clerk of court based on their submittal. Again, now this one shows the amended budget, which has the one-time enhancement added into it, and it shows you the breakdown. So when you look at their amended budget, for last year, or this year, it's $3.8 million. They're requesting a $3.9 million budget, which represents a change of about $124,000. When you minus out their one-time enhancement out of the amended budget, it makes that delta a little bit bigger. They had a little bit of a reduction in some of their clerk earned revenue. If you have, any specific questions, I welcome them to provide those. This is just a summary based on our conversations that we've had. And again, some of those revenues, it's court-related. If you have less people doing transactions in court, whether it's recording of titles, things like that, real estate transactions, we may have maybe less people refinancing because of mortgage rates being higher. You may have people coming into the community that are paying cash for their homes, so they're not having to record documents. Nonetheless, some of their revenues are down. But they have, if you look up at the personnel, it's only going up 6%. They're operating. They have, drastically reduced their operating expense down almost 20%. It's at 19.6% reduction. And they are, mindful of the challenges that they have, and they've cut some of their court-related expenses as well. So overall, it does represent an increase of the 24.3, but there's a little bit more that goes into it. And these are just some of the highlights from the clerk's budget. At the end of year last year, the clerk of court did hand back to the board their excess fees, which they're required to do. So even though we did give money to them as part of that amended budget process, they gave money back, and that was anticipated. That's why we gave it back to them that following year. Reduction in non-court operated expenditures. Again, they reduced approximately $90,000 on the court side, and that's reflective due to the decrease in revenue. They also, we mentioned that decreased clerk earned revenue, but they did decrease court expenditures. They do have a request for 2 full-time positions to be added. Their budget, as we presented it, includes that. I think what they're able to do is fill that because they did have some higher paid positions retire out. So if you go back, I'll just go back, pull it back up on the screen. When you look at the personnel cost, you see how it's only really going up 6%. That's because they did have some higher waged employees that are coming out of there. So they're able to kind of capture some of that cost built in, as well as the FRS, the changes to COLA and stuff like that. So I don't know if you have any questions. If you do, I can have somebody from the clerk's office or the clerk of court himself, or if you'd like to wait until the end. And
Were there any one-time expenses in that budget to get the building back in its original shape from the sheriff moving out?
those expenses would not run through the clerk's office.
But we'd pay for all that.
That would run through general services and facilities.
Okay, great. Thank you. Andy?
Just a question on just a background of the basis for the positions, maybe in more detail, just so I have a better understanding of what the need is and where the positions are.
I would ask somebody from the clerk's office to provide that, as I don't have those details.
Good morning. Tom Bexley, Clerk and Comptroller. Ms. Petito, I think, did a pretty good job, all in all, kind of portraying what our budget stands for. I think that 24% increase is, I think on paper, the number is correct, but that's not really what the bottom line of the budget is. Just to kind of surmise it from my point of view and make it a little more understandable, basically what we did is we took our final budget. That was the approved budget plus any amendments that were made along the way. And we basically took all of the guidance that was provided from county administration and from you folks, which that would be a COLA increase, statutory FRS increases, and health insurance increases. And then we took and added a request for 2 full-time equivalent employees. And that increase was basically a continuation budget, and then an addition of 2 people. The 2 full-time equivalent positions, we are targeting those. Number one, I think if you're not growing, you're shrinking. In a county that's definitely growing, the demand for services has never been higher. So we're doing some proactive work to make sure that we have all the work covered. These 2 positions are probably for our 2 busiest areas, which is recording records and board records. That's the function that we provide to you, as well as the finance department, which is the comptroller function. And that's reflective of volume increases, as well as financial reporting, responsibility increases, and growing population of Flagler County.
If I remember last year, you didn't have funds for additional positions. Was that correct?
Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I just, in general, just to summarize, after COVID and all the changes, the sheriff being co-located with you and all that, would you say you're back to normal core operations, no COVID restrictions, and the sheriff is now moved? So would you say that this budget kind of represents the new normal?
I think that's a good way to put it, Commissioner. All of the, I think the extraordinary restraints were put on us because of COVID, that's all gone now. The court's normally functioning. We have been restored, all of our space has been returned to us. We're in the process of working with the county right now to do all the actual construction work that will make us fully functional again. And it'll be nice to get back to normal, so we're not working in those cramped quarters again, and that we can, like you say, get back to normal. And this is the new norm now. Yeah.
When do you anticipate hiring those 2 people?
Quickly as possible,
As soon as
sir.
possible?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we get this very modest increase to our budgets, we can go out and hire some good qualified people.
Good. Thank you. Commissioners, anything else? Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much.
Okay, moving forward, this is the Supervisor of Elections budget. When you look at the amended budget, it does include the one-time enhancement that was provided at the beginning of the year. And this is a breakdown of their budget as presented. It goes over the administration side of voter registration as well as the election side. So we broke it out so you could see the personnel and the operating. So when you look at the amended 23 budget and you look at the requested for the administration voter registration personnel, it's showing an increase of 26.7%. The operating for that budget is also going up 22.6%. The elections personnel is reflective of a 73.3% increase, and then the elections operating side representing a 27.3% increase. So overall, the subtotal is almost 30% increase. It's 29.6, but if you back out the one-time enhancement that was provided, I believe it was for equipment or I thought it was a one-time expense. But when you back that out, it's actually showing an increase over last year's adopted budget of $1.8 million to the requested 2.7 million. It's an increase of $949,000, or a 52.4% increase. These are some of the budget highlights. Last year, the Supervisor of Elections did return $116,000. In her budget request, she states it's related to unfunded state and federal mandates and 2 upcoming elections. And she also has a decision unit requesting 1 additional full-time position.
One or two?
I believe it was 1. But they are here, so if you have questions specific to the Supervisor of Elections.
Chairman. Just a couple of general questions. I realize we got a major election coming up in this coming year. Did anybody look at the last time, year to year, when we had the same situation where you had a non-major election year followed by, the national election, to see if some of those increases were similar?
I think in looking at the budget, what's happened over the last several years, what the board has deemed to be a one-time enhancement, which was intended to be a one-time and then it would come out, it appears that that has continued to be added in and grown over the last several years. So what was a one-time enhancement ends up continuing to grow year after year.
I'd like to explain that, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, good. Okay,
Please.
so the one-time enhancement really just made my budget whole. When the millage was adopted, my budget was $319,000 short of what we needed for operating in order to conduct the 22 general election. So Heidi, you're correct that the one-time enhancement is really, it's not an enhancement. It is making the budget whole so that we can continue to have operations and continue to conduct great elections in this county. So I don't think that the one-time enhancement language should be continued to be used. In fact, that whole pro rata share budget process doesn't really work for us. The 1% increase for my portion of the countywide budget is just not, it's not sufficient to meet the needs of the county, especially when we are looking at having over 100,000 voters coming up soon. We have 98,000 right now and growing. Our county continues to grow. And we have a lot of requirements that were mentioned on the previous slide, the state and federal mandates. As you know, the legislature continues to pass very large elections administration bills. Those affect the budget. I have to now order all new forms, paperwork, and sometimes, like in Senate Bill 90, it required new equipment. New precinct supplies, all new precinct supplies. So all of that is included, again, because of Senate Bill 7050, which recently passed, actually 2 days before this budget was due. So there could be costs related to that are not realized here in this budget because my budget is due May 1st and the bill was passed on April 27th, which it has been signed, so it is now law and effective on July 1st. So in this budget, there are 2 elections. We have the presidential preference primary in March, and then also our regularly scheduled primary election in August. So to your point, looking at those different election cycles and how it affects the budget, every 4 years, we will have a budget that includes those 2 elections. Those 2 elections are not optional. So I have to present the budget as required by state and federal law to conduct those elections. So that's why you're seeing those increases in elections, elections operating, elections personnel, all of that is doubled basically for the 2 elections. And then the admin, voter registration and operating, well, the personnel obviously is going to be your FRS, your health insurance, and my request for 1 additional employee. That's what that 26.7% is there. And then the operating, we do have requirements now that are federally mandated as elections are considered critical infrastructure. So a lot of that's IT related, cybersecurity, all of that. which those of you who've been on the canvassing board know about that, because you got to see it in action during the election. So we have also some vendor increases for some of our equipment in that admin operating, that 22.6% there. But again, that one-time enhancement, the number, the 52.4%, I don't agree with that as being a number that's even related to my budget. The budget as adopted would have been the requested amount, including that enhancement.
Katie, you mentioned vendors. That excuse me, that price went up $40,000. Is that a one-time thing, or is that there were 4 pieces to it where vendors went up?
Yeah,
And the
there
total
are-
was 39 and change. It was almost 40,000. Is that a
Right.
one-time, or does that happen every year?
There will be increases because we have new equipment in the office, the ballot sorting, the TriTech equipment. That is probably about half of what you've mentioned. The rest is for our voting system vendor increase, and then also our vendors that do our vote by mail, because we're moving, those numbers are increasing. They were, everything expired after Senate Bill 90. At the end of this year, all the vote by mail requests expired. Well, a lot of our residents and citizens that enjoy voting by mail have put those requests back on. So now we're back up to where we were in 2020 for the presidential preference primary, around 22,000 requests. We're back there. So that's a projected increase related to those 2 elections.
And again, is that just this year, or is that typical of every year?
the
That we'll have
ven-
that kind of an increase with the vendors?
The equipment will be, hopefully not that type of increase every year. We're hoping that it's not the case. It's because of that new equipment.
Right, once you
But-
learn how to use it, and,
Well, right, because that maintenance kicked in the year after we
Right.
purchased, right? So the
Right.
first year was free, so that second year now we pay. So that won't be every year. Really, the issue is the 2 elections in the budget. That's what's really increased it for this fiscal year.
and how quickly can you hire that person?
I hope very soon.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioners, Mr. O'Brien?
just help on one thing, Katie. I don't know if I read this incorrectly or I'm misunderstanding, but you have a medical insurance increase of $13,645 per employee. I'm just wondering if that's a typo or something I'm not understanding. That just seems in your write-up.
Okay, in the budget narrative in the email that I sent?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
There was we used the number that was provided by the county administration. Is that not the total?
I wouldn't think on an increase it is, maybe.
It's per
We-
employee.
We had some concerns with the personnel side of this budget, but there isn't sufficient detail to break it out. I know that Mr. Eichinger had reached out and was trying to clarify that. We had an issue on the medical side. We had an issue on the FRS side. It appears that it may be overinflated by error, not necessarily, intentional, but on error, and we're trying to clarify that with their office. So we do think that it is maybe a little higher than normal. As you go through the rest of the budgets, when you look at the personnel, even in the case of departments that have added people, it ranges somewhere between 10 and 15%. And in this particular one, it's 26.7. So it does seem a little off to us.
Your folks, your health insurance you're part of the county
That's correct.
self-insured plan, correct?
Right, and that's the
Okay.
first I've heard of there being an issue with the health insurance amounts and the FRS. So I'm glad to provide any detail that's required or requested.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the only question I had.
Okay, anybody
So
else?
Katie, are you foreseeing a need for more funds from 7050, for Bill 7050?
I hope not. What we're going to be doing, it's my plan to use this current budget to try to offset some of those costs. So hopefully not. I really don't want to come back to you. I really, really, really don't. So
When do you
we're gonna
think you'll
try not to.
know, or do you?
That's a good question. I think that we would have a very good understanding of it by the end of July. Yes, because right now, the state has not provided guidance, and they're still in the process of rulemaking. So for us, we're in between. We're stuck in the middle between what the law says and what the actual rule will be to implement. So at this time, it's an unknown. But I'm hoping that they start their rulemaking process very soon so that we can have those questions answered.
Talk a little bit more about the mandates from the legislature, and a little bit, you talked about some additional papers and different things. What's the breakdown on equipment, hard machinery versus the other paper materials and other mandates?
Well, one of the things we got a grant for this year is called Clear Ballot. It's an independent auditing system. It's being used across the state, and it's actually now certified to be used for an independent automated recount, and also the audit that's required after the election, the post-manual audit. You can actually use this new technology for that. We received a grant. Well, it's funded. We haven't gotten the actual check, but the grant was approved by the Department of State. We'll see if it shows up sometime soon, hopefully. So going forward, we'll be using that system as a third-party independent audit of the actual results. So that is going to be very exciting. It's not required by law, but it is now actually certified for use. So that's something we thought that the legislature would require it. And a lot of the counties throughout the state have moved forward with the purchase using the grant fund. So it's not anything you all have to deal with, but that is related to legislation as far as the certification process. 7050 requires a new statement on all voter information cards. It basically says this card is not proof of eligibility. You can check your eligibility with the Department of State. So we had to, toss all of our voter registration cards, get all new ones. I've ordered those already. That's not a huge cost, but going forward in a presidential election year, yeah, it's going to be, we're going to be sending out cards. People are registering to vote at record numbers in our county. So also list maintenance, voter registration list maintenance is now required to be annual. So we haven't started the process yet. We will after the new law takes effect because we have to change all the paperwork and forms for that. That's when, so basically voter registration list maintenance is when we have to kind of chase voters around. Did you move? Do you still live here? Because a lot of people will move out of the state or move into the state and not cancel their previous registration in another state, or they won't update it with our office. We get a lot from Ms. Suzanne in the tax collector's office through DMV, which is very helpful, but that doesn't include everyone. Not everybody gets their driver's license right away. So that's, all those forms and everything have changed. So that's another requirement this year for us to do that list maintenance, and that's in this budget. So that's not going to be an issue, but for the next fiscal year, we're going to have to, order all new forms for that, because it's required annually now. And also for the, as far as equipment, pretty much we're just going to need to have everything that's required for 2 elections. It's not necessarily related to legislation in that way, but we do need to, have everything we need, we normally would have, times 2. Because we have 2 elections.
The new equipment, though, is there new equipment coming in, or is this just enhancements to your current equipment?
I'm not talking about voting systems. I'm talking about like ballot on demand supplies, printer supplies, ink, all of that precinct equipment, not actual voting systems equipment.
Okay.
So we're not ordering any new voting systems equipment. We don't need any more ballot boxes. We don't need any more check-in stations. We have a sufficient amount purchased by grant in previous election years for that.
But this is in anticipation just of a lot of people coming to vote.
We're going to have a lot of voting going on, yes.
Right.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms.
Yeah,
Sullivan.
just in general, having been on the canvassing board, as you said, a couple of us, Andy and myself, in the last time we were there for the election, 2022, I guess, there had been laws changed. And there were still not final interpretation of those laws.
Yes, welcome to
Even
my
during that election. So now we have another law that's been passed. Where are we on the judges finally coming to some final decision on how to conduct the elections in detail?
That's a great question. So Senate Bill 90, that lawsuit is still on appeal. And that's the one from 2021, okay? So
Right.
that's the one that affected the 2022
Right.
election. Now we have legislation, the Senate Bill 7050, which has been contested in the court. So that's another lawsuit for us to deal with. Every supervisor in the state gets sued every year, at least once. So I told them to get in line, so now we'll deal with that lawsuit. So that one's ongoing, who knows? I mean, they could throw everything out or it could be in effect for us for 2024. There's no way to tell right now, and especially how long these take. I mean, we're talking about Senate Bill 90 still, and that was, 3 years ago. So these federal lawsuits take a long time. And then we also have the Department of State, which needs to work on, like I said, the rulemaking and the actual procedures and interpret the statute. So that's forthcoming.
Anything else, Commissioners? Katie, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Doing a great job.
Okay, moving along is the property appraiser's budget. So when you look at their adopted budget of last year of the 2.774, the requested budget for fiscal year '24 has a reduction in personnel going down to $2,734,000. So overall, there is a decrease in their personnel by 1.4%. When you look at the operating, it's a slight increase. There's a slight increase for some capital, and then there's a non-capital line item. Overall, when you look at the budget, it's a subtotal is 2.5% increase overall. He does bring in revenue from the Water Management District as well as the mosquito control and find. So when you minus out those additional revenues, it's actually a 2.4% increase overall in his budget. When you look at the highlights of that budget, last year, the property appraiser did give back $165,848, and he has been able to reduce his personnel by 1.43%. Does anybody have any questions for him?
Property appraiser want to say anything? Are you good?
Commissioners, any questions? Or Jay, you want to talk? How'd you reduce personnel costs?
Restructure in the office. We had some people change jobs. We had some people that left, and we were able to restructure. We also got some software that helped us eliminate a position, actually. We redid that person somewhere else to do something for us as we lost people. But, it's just, we're doing the best we can.
We know that.
Mr. Chairman, do we, last year, there was some last-minute changes in the total amount of dollars coming in, as I remember. I'm trying to remember what happened, but right near the end, as you remember, there was a change in the numbers. And my guess is, does it look like we're going to be pretty solid this year on the dates when we'll find out income, things like that?
Are you
And
talking
without-
about the taxable value?
Well, you remember last year there was a change. I forget the
That's the
exact.
taxable value, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a software issue, and we
Yeah.
had a little itch in our giddy up. And of course, it didn't bother you guys near as much as it bothered me, because everybody that got hit with it, we had to increase all the new construction
Right.
by a percentage because of the new software messing up. And of course, that was no fun, because you send them a second trim notice with more money. They already thought the first one was high. So,
Well,
and
I'm
we
just
got to
saying,
raise all
in
those
doing
again
the
this
budget
year.
process, any changes like that, last-minute changes, do create problems for everyone involved, because you have to change, across the board and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's all solid now, software's working. And
Yeah, well, that really wasn't budget. That was the values that you
Yeah,
guys
but it
would be
affects the budget.
multiplying by. It wasn't anything to do with my budget. It was your budget that would be the problem,
Right.
so.
Okay, but that's all, we don't see any problems like that coming this year.
No, we didn't see any coming before either, just so.
And you're sitting here thinking,
You don't
thanks,
plan on something like that, I promise you.
I'm just remembering, get it on record, it's not going to
Yeah.
happen
sitting there
again.
thinking, thanks, Commissioner, for bringing that back up again. That was,
Oh, it don't bother me, hey. If
No, I
you're-
just
if you're
don't wanna get
perfect,
it
you
out
can
of-
throw the first stone, okay? But anyway, and this year, we're still up quite a bit, just changing the subject. We're up about, the last time I looked at it, we're about 12.4% taxable. So that's the number y'all get to play with. So it's, the demise of the market's greatly exaggerated for January 1 of '23. So we're still up. It's slowed down. It's, if it's going to be flat or whatever, it'll be next year, not this year. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Next up is the tax collector. When you look at this budget, it's fee-based, so it is a percentage of whatever that taxable value is. So this right now is an estimate showing that increase of 5.7%, which is the allotted amount. This formal budget isn't submitted until August, so we're not going to know the final number, but again, it's not something that you can change. This is something that they are fee-based, so they get a percentage of whatever they collect, and at the end of the year, you get the benefit of the reversion that they hand back. So when you look at last year, in excess fees, our tax collector was able to return almost $1.2 million. As you know, that's money that we use to help shore up our cash carry forward or our fund balance. So it's not money that we've already kind of spent it before we've gotten it back from her, unfortunately, where we've reallocated it and made sure that we're able to strengthen those reserves. But last year, we are very thankful that she was able to give back almost $1.2 million. I don't know if you all have any questions for her. I know she's here.
Good morning. What y'all need to remember is the amount showing in your budget is what you pay the office for the collection of your property taxes and the school board property taxes. If you want to reduce that, you would reduce your revenue or the school would reduce their revenue. If it's increased, it's because the revenue increased, what you actually receive increased, or the school. So, and our budget is August 1st to Tallahassee, and a lot of that is until we know how much money you're going to levy, and the school and the other taxing authorities, we have no way of even estimating our income for the year. The state requires line item justification with expenditures showing through June 30th because we're doing state work, which is why that's the cause. So if you want it reduced, you can reduce how much money y'all receive. That would be easy way. And we don't frivolously spend, so we try to maximize our unused fees to operate the office. Any questions?
Yeah, do you see a reduction in income because of the firearm carry issue that they don't need a license anymore?
Right, and you see, with that, the income had reduced way down on that anyway. If it's an 8-year license, you keep shrinking that pool
Right.
that's going to be getting a license. Volusia also started, so that pulled some of our revenue away. But if you don't have a concealed carry and you go into another state, see, you could end up with a real problem on your hands from that.
Right.
They're looking at having us do the security officers' renewals on that, which for the gun carry portion. Right now, they have to go to Jacksonville, so that's still in a pilot program.
But the people who have concealed carry permits still will renew those?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
And they are.
Yeah. And are you still attacking the vacation rental, ferreting out the scofflaws on that?
Oh, yes. Y'all
Good.
can be assured that if I pay my taxes, you pay your taxes, everybody else is going to be paying also. So if you see anybody renting, let us know, because we have anonymous reporting. You don't even have to give your name on that. I go through whenever I'm on Facebook, I take the pictures, send the messages, all of that. I was just tagging them in it, but the employees I was tagging, their friends started asking them if they were looking for a place to rent. Were they leaving their husband or something like this? So I started with the pictures instead. So, but yeah, if y'all see somebody renting, let us know. That money, it's the beach renourishment money, a lot of it. So it's very important to every single person in this room that we maximize the collections on that.
We have a phenomenon over in the Hammock right now where they're actually building homes purely for rental. That's all it's for. They're just going to build them and rent them. So, yeah, so we're going to get some more money, I think, out of those people.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Chairman, as the chairman of the TDC, for each of our TDC meetings, we get a full briefing on that, and they've done a great job on making sure that, the last few briefings, where you've gone out and found somebody who has been paying their taxes, you issue them a note. Apparently, most of the time, they pay it right up. They're not willing to
Well, and
take
if
it.
they don't pay, we have no problem posting orange notices on all doors to let anybody, if their neighbors know they're not paying or the renters know they're not paying. It's whatever gets their attention. Fair's
From
fair.
everything I've seen, it's been very effective, and we're making sure that when they're known, you're on top of them right away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward. As you know, the sheriff's budget is broken down into 3 separate categories. They break it down into bailiff, inmate, and law enforcement. So we'll take a look at each one of these separately, and then you'll see a combined summary at the end. So in looking at the bailiff budget, you have an overall increase there of 9.5%. Seems very in line with the increases that you would expect due to FRS and some of those changes to healthcare. COLA, stuff like that, COLA, and they also have a step plan. So again, consistent with what you would expect to see. Here's a look at the inmate budget. Again, what you would typically see with an increase in personnel there of 13.8%, operating up a little bit based on contracts. Overall, it ends up being an 11.9% increase over last year. And then looking at the law enforcement piece, which is the larger share of the sheriff's budget, personnel going up 12.6%, operating 9%. When you look at the subtotal, it's about 11.6%. But then when you factor in the sheriff has service contracts in place with the City of Palm Coast, School Board, maybe a few others there, that shows that line item is less his revenue. I think he also generates some miscellaneous revenue as well. So it brings it down to an 11.1% increase overall for law enforcement. And then when you look at the total of all 3 of those categories, whether it's bailiff, inmate, or law enforcement, last year's budget was $36.6 million. The request for this year is $40.7 million. And then we have added in there the transfer of some of those IT costs. As you remember, at the beginning of the year, we transferred over a pro rata share of the staff. This 1.1 million is representative of the different software or different contracts that are in place. This isn't for salary, but this is the cost that we're riding through the board side and pooled expenditure, so we're going to move that over. So when you look at the total increase, it's a $5.2 million increase, or 14.4%.
That 1.166, is that a one-time charge, just this year?
Well, it's going to be ongoing, because those are contracts, so that's going to
Okay.
be, it's a cost that ran on our side, we're just transferring it over.
Okay.
But you'll see
Mr.
that.
Chairman, just on that point, it won't be listed separately. It'll just be part of the overall sheriff's,
Correct.
yeah.
Just, we're breaking it out here because it wasn't something that was in his detailed budget. It's really just a pass-through that was riding on our side that we're just going to hand over so that he can manage those expenses and those contracts. So when you look at the summary or the highlights of his budget, last year, the sheriff was able to give back $36,000. This year's operating increase are largely due to fuel, contractual agreements, as well as the cost of inmate food and supplies. We've got that detail there where we are going to transfer those IT expenses. In his budget, he also had the conversion of 3 part-time employees to full-time, and then the decision unit requesting 5 additional deputies.
There was a discussion of impact fees in the budget, 73,000 or something. Does that just automatically go to the sheriff?
No, the impact fees are collected by the City of Palm Coast and Flagler County. City of Palm Coast hands those over, I believe it's quarterly or semi-annually. So I'm not sure that the city has provided the impact fees, but impact fees can only be used for capital.
Right.
So they're not used for ongoing. If the board were to fund the request of the 5 additional deputies, what we would do at the board's direction would be to look at how much is truly capital, which would only typically pay for those capital expenses, not things that have a value of more than $5,000. So the only thing that really comes to mind is maybe the vehicles, if the board was inclined to do that. Typically, they're the board's discretion on how those are used. What you normally would see is it going into like expansion of facilities or some major equipment, not necessarily vehicles, but it can be used for vehicles.
As an example, Mr. Chairman, last year, we had to come up with the additional funding for the camera system at the jail. Would that be something that those impact fees could be used for?
If you're enhancing or improving the equipment, then yes. There's a test that you have to go through. It depends. It's not just for like replacement maintenance, but if you're expanding or doing something above the current level that you have, where it like adds value or can extend the useful life or something like that, it would be a discussion that we typically have with the clerk's office on whether or not those expenditures can, pass through the test. But it's not money, the money would not be used like for leased vehicles. So like if you have debt service and you're leasing vehicles, it wouldn't be used for that. It would be, it's one-time capital purchase.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I just had a question for the sheriff.
Yes, sir.
Sheriff, in some of, you're right up about the inmate population growing and the population in the jail as a whole. It's not necessarily always just a function of arrests. I mean, there's several factors that could factor into that. Is it that? Is it we have more crime, or is it also, is there any impact from a slowdown in the state court system? What's attributable for all of that?
Sure, Commissioner. Rick Staley, Flagler County Sheriff. So there's a lot of different factors that drive that, and you've touched on a lot of them. First off, our crime is down, but calls for service are up, and our arrests are up, especially post-COVID, where it went down some. We believe that by the end of this year, we will have averaged 300 inmates a night in the jail. I'll put that in perspective for you. When I was elected sheriff in 2016, it was 128 inmates a night in the jail. Now, what's driving that are a number of factors. One is more arrests. The judges, because it's kind of like a double-edged sword. We implemented a lot of programs in the jail to try to help inmates get on the right path and reduce the recidivism instead of constantly being arrested and coming back into the jail. So the courts have now realized that. And quite frankly, in a state prison, they don't get much, if anything, to turn their life around and become productive citizens. So what we're starting to see now is that the courts are sentencing them to county court time or county jail time. So again, the law is 364 days or less, they're in the county jail. 365 days or more, they go to a state facility. And so what happens when we have the sentenced inmates, they can go through our programs, but we are responsible for their meals, their medical, moving them back and forth to court as the judge wants to see them. So there's a lot of impacts that are occurring. During COVID, and we don't have this problem today, but during COVID, the state of Florida, because they did not have staffing for their prisons, they throttled significantly the number of inmates that were sentenced to state time to accept. And during COVID, we were down to 2 inmates a month, which means we were holding 13, 14, sometimes 15 inmates that have been sentenced to state prison time, and the state wouldn't accept them yet. And as a result, the state doesn't pay for them, they don't care for them. They're in our custody, we're responsible for feeding and any medical issues that come up until they get delivered there. That has now gone away. We are not having the throttle that was occurring during COVID. So it has improved significantly. Part of that is they now are able to hire more of their staff because the governor and the legislature in the last 2 years significantly increased their salaries, significantly. And so now they can attract. And so that's what's going on there. So the people that, the inmates that attend our programs, the recidivism rate is down to about 25% instead of the 70, 80% that's normal. And so we know the programs are successful, but the unintended consequences are the judges are sentencing them to county jail time. Now, let me also say that we need sentenced inmates also because they do the laundry. They cook the meals under the guidance of our jail contractor. They do the maintenance. We have an inmate work crew that's all sentenced inmates that take care of a lot of the landscaping and some of your facilities. In fact, the operations center, they help move us to the operations center. So we can't operate the jail without inmate labor. So we do need the sentenced inmates because those are the ones that we can offer incentives to work in the jail. Because without that, you'd see the jail budget skyrocket because we still have to feed and so forth.
Your 5 increase in 5 personnel, it's in your law enforcement budget, so they're going to be patrol deputies?
Well, not necessarily, Commissioner. That's where we put it right now so we could present it to your budget. My jail needs additional people. It's only had 1 increase in staff, and that was when I was first elected sheriff. I came to you and we converted CCTV operators, a control room, to civilians, professional support, and moved those deputies to the jail. And now with averaging 300 inmates, more of them have to go to the hospital, unfortunately. Means we have to guard them. More have to come to court, and the list goes on and on. So what I anticipate is the majority of those will go to the detention facility because frankly, they're being overwhelmed right now.
And how soon would you hire those 5?
So we're in the process of hiring people now. So in my law enforcement side, so I have a slide if we did the PowerPoint presentation, but it takes about a year to totally hire, train, both at the state required academy or internal academy before you have a deputy completely able to operate on his own. In the jail, it's a little bit shorter than that. It's only about 9 months because there's more on-the-job training in a controlled environment. And so right now, my law enforcement side is four positions over hire, which I authorize because our turnover rate's about 3%, which is amazingly low. And but it takes a year. If you look at the application, the processing time, then the state academy, we've had to change our hiring process. What we used to do is only hire already certified law enforcement or detention deputies. You can't do that today. It's too competitive, and you just can't get them. So we're now having to pay for them to sit in the academy at a lower rate than a deputy sheriff trainee, if you will, and pay the academy costs. Now, fortunately, we get reimbursement through a state program on the academy costs, and we try to recruit from out of state, which can change that time frame also. So we're hiring. I'm down 2 detention deputies right now. We worked with Daytona State College, and they will put on a corrections academy as long as we can guarantee 5, and we're going to do that because that's the only way they'll put it on is if they have enough students.
Chairman, and just so I understand then, so on the budget that we're looking at for 23-24, you've got a 13.8% increase in personnel for the inmate facility, but that doesn't include any of these 5 additional people. But I guess next year it would?
Well, what we would do is if you approve the 5 deputy sheriffs, we will reassess again exactly where the biggest demand is. I believe you're going to find it's detention, and all I would be doing is moving that 713 from law enforcement to detention on the budget.
Right, but none of that is anticipated in the budget as you presented to us here. In other words, the personnel costs at the inmate facility do not include any additional.
That's correct. Right. Here's what's driving that. Inmate medical, inmate food. Of course, they have a piece of the fuel also because we have to transport inmates not only to this court, but if they get caught in Miami or wherever they are, we have to go down there and pick them up and bring them back if they're a fugitive from Flagler County. The Florida retirement system, the majority of my employees are special risk, and that's the category that the state is really skyrocketing. The retirement contributions mandated by the state, I don't control that. So the increase that you see in detention is all of that. Does not include those people, but the people would either stay in law enforcement, which quite frankly, I've been spending a lot of time in the jail. I can tell you that 300 inmates a night is really stressing the abilities of the current employees. What I've asked my jail chief to do, though, is exactly what we did in the law enforcement side, is to develop a swing shift. So in other words, I'm just not putting more people on day shift or night shift when I don't necessarily need them at 3 o'clock in the morning, is the peak times that we have to cover and move inmates around. So that's how those people would be used.
Do you anticipate an increase of 5 deputies every year?
Commissioner, I could probably use more than that, okay?
I've read your report.
And, we have a study, and you guys, along with the city of Palm Coast, have done a great job on the law enforcement side, getting us out of the deficit deputies that the study showed. I think we made it like 1 or 2 deputies, and I'm only talking about the law enforcement side, into growth. And that was as of 2018. A new study was done, and you all have a report of that. Here's the flaw in that study when we're trying to figure out the future. As you add more law enforcement deputies, and that includes detectives, patrol, and so forth, we just increased the traffic unit by 3 motorcycles because we all see the traffic issues. That means more arrests. It means more dispatchers. Our calls for service, 911 calls right now have increased 12% already this year, 3% for non-emergency. And remember, we dispatch for everybody, the fire departments, the 2 police departments, and the sheriff's office. So that's all services that we're the first phone call that gets made. And none of those studies show the impact to detention, to professional support, to 911 operators, records, and so forth. And so, yes, if you look at the studies, and that's why I think there is a meeting set up, because I've encouraged this meeting between your appointed staff. I don't know if any elected officials are going to be there, between the city and the county, is let's try to figure out a way to make sure that we maintain our safe community. Because I can tell you right now, unfortunately, the dirtbags from Jacksonville, Duval County, have found Flagler County. A lot of the people that we're arresting now for property crimes are coming out of Jacksonville. Fortunately, I've got a great team, and our technology has helped catch them. Just Saturday night, stolen car out of Jacksonville, fled from St. Johns County, is driving down US 1, so where were they going to go? We don't know. They crashed on US 1 at Wellfield Grade and fled the vehicle. 6 juveniles we apprehended in that. Now, I can tell you what they normally do. They steal a car in Jacksonville or Daytona. They try to come here. They'll leave that stolen car here. They'll do auto burglaries for cars that are not locked, and then they eventually find one that has keys left in it, and then they take that car and steal it and go back to where they came from. And so we don't want to lose that. And so that's only the law enforcement side. So if they're going call to call to call, when we get an LPR hit, you got to have time to then go find it, because you got to find this needle in a haystack. We have a lot of technology that helps the deputies, but they still got to be relatively nearby. So they were apprehended before they could steal a car and before they could do something else. And we're having the same issue with Daytona. Daytona, frankly, dirtbags come up here and try to do stuff. We just arrested a shooter that Daytona was looking for just a couple days ago. So I want to keep our little bubble that we have safe, but I can't do it alone, and that's why I come to you.
Thank you. Commissioners? Mr. Dance?
Yes. So explain, a lot of my questions will be for the general public as well, because I wonder how when you say crimes down, arrests are up, explain how those two work together when you have crime down and arrests are up.
So that's a good question. Crime is down, but arrests are up because it's shoplifting, it's auto thefts, it's fugitives that come into this county, it's DUI, the list goes on and on. And so while the crime that is tracked by the Uniform Crime Reporting, now called NIBRS, is down statistically, there's a lot of things that aren't tracked when you look at crime rate.
So the things you mentioned are not tracked? The ones that aren't tracked, repeat those.
So for example, arrests are all tracked, but they don't necessarily count as crime rate. Great example of that is DUI. A great example of that is shoplifting. Those things we deal with. We go to Walmart all the time. We go to Target all the time and arrest shoplifters. Construction thefts are like right now, technically my burglary, they're all construction thefts. Home burglaries that qualify as a burglary are significantly up. And so we'll see what happens at the end of this year. So far, I keep wondering when we're going to plateau on a crime reduction, and I really commend our people for that. But we only had a 2% crime reduction last year. And, it's slowing down on what we're able to do.
So arrests don't necessarily translate to a crime report.
Correct. Not under UCR and NIBRS.
But if you're getting arrested, you've committed a crime.
Correct. Under the statute, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Like
Pennington?
you'll take in a lot of arrests for driving without a driver's license, but not technically a crime committed against us or in our community.
So, Commissioner, maybe I can explain it this way. In 2016, there were roughly 1,900 victims of crime. Okay, one victim, one crime. At the end of last year, my memory serves me correct, there are 877 victims of crime. So if you take the 1,900 to 877, that's a reduction of 54%. But yet our arrests are averaging about 300 a month. So, and a lot of things, frankly, some of the arrests, and this doesn't get counted, is judge lets them out, they don't show up in court. They violate their probation. None of that gets counted in UCR. And we go back and arrest these people over and over and over because the courts have given them opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Then they issue a warrant, it impacts us, my fugitive unit or my deputies on the street have to go find them and arrest them, starts the cycle all over again. None of that's counted in UCR and NIBRS.
And goes back to what you said, though, with calls for service being up.
Correct.
So in the budget proposal, you've asked for 5 deputies, but as you've explained, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going out on patrol because of the inmate facility. Will you be, as Commissioner Sullivan explained, will you be adjusting the 3 different components so that it reflects where those deputies will go so that the public understands where you're distributing and where you need help?
Well, if you would like to do that, I'll be glad to do that. I would just say that I'm the top law enforcement officer of the county, and I assign deputies as I see as appropriate. So I'm telling you now that, you know, my total budget hopefully is, you know, what I've requested for, and I think it's my responsibility to use them efficiently and effectively. If you want me to tell you where these 5 are going to go when they're approved and everything's funded, I'll be glad to do that.
I think just from my standpoint, I'd like to be able to also explain and when asked by the public how those funds are being used. Not that, you know, we question where you're putting them. It's just from our standpoint, at least from mine, I like to be able to understand when we approve 5 people that we just, you know, that they're not all going to road deputies. If crime is down, you've got other needs, and we can properly explain that to the public as well.
Commissioner, once we have agreement on the budget, and I know those 5 are there, I'll be glad to tell you where, for sure, where all 5 are going to go.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? One more question on the 5. So starting day 1, you get, if we approve it, you get all the money for 5 deputies. You're not, what do you do with the money in the first month, the second month that you don't spend?
So I'm paying them to sit in an academy right now and attend the academy. Then when they come out of the academy, they go through a field training program internally. Then they go to a deputy and a shadow, whether it's in the jail or that.
So does that start on October 1st?
It will if you authorize this, because we're already processing people now. And we will already anticipate some turnover or some. So if you don't approve it, then I'll fill them with turnover. But they're, I think our next academy class for detention is July, right? So our goal is, I'm down 2, our goal is to put 7 or 8 in that academy class. So we're already paying in there. And on your surplus money from last year, it's $36,000, but I think that's the $36,000 that doesn't include the money from FEMA reimbursement. So that money is, remember I had projected 150 and then we got hit with these 2 damn storms, right? And so I don't think any of that money's come in yet, right? But that will be going back to you. That's not money I keep. That was in another fiscal year. So that money actually is higher, but it's kind of like an IOU. Actually, it's a FEMA IOU.
It comes back to us.
Correct.
Right.
So any money that we can save, we'll give back. We're not running deficits, which I'm very proud of because, in years past, we have had a hard time hiring. That's why we had to change our hiring process. We can't wait now. It's cheaper for the taxpayer. It's easier for the sheriff's office if I can hire people already certified. You can't do that in today's work environment. So we're having to recruit completely green. This is the career that they want. We have to pay them to go to the academy as a salary. We have to pay the academy, then they have to go through our process. So it's really a year. Detention's about 9 months, but it's basically a year in law enforcement. You lose a deputy before somebody can go on patrol by themselves. And so that's what we're doing now. That's the only way we can maintain. And I'll just mention something else to you because this was on my PowerPoint, but we're doing things differently a little this year. There's, other than the 5.3% COLA, so my starting pay right now is $50,200. If with 5.3% COLA, it runs at 52 and some change is what the starting pay will be. St. Johns County is going October 1 to 55,000. The sheriff's goal there is to go to 60,000 the following year. Volusia County is at 51.5. The sheriff hasn't told me what he's going to. I bring this up to you because the only one we're beating right now is Putnam County. And I don't want to be the training ground for deputies, law enforcement, or detention because every time I have to replace somebody, it's about $100,000. So you might as well pay them to keep them rather than start all over and not be able to retain them. So I just mentioned that to you because, and I know St. Johns County has a lot of cash, and we'll never be able to be number one. I recognize that, but we have to be competitive. So that is something, and it's probably the same issue with your fire department too. I don't know what fire departments around are doing, but I would suspect they're getting the pressure like we are. So that is something that is going to have to be addressed at some point. We made a great step last year. Unfortunately, we've been trumped by the other counties significantly.
Sheriff, the Volusia County, they have their own training facility. They've invested in that, but basically, conceptually, it's the same thing. They're paying those. They recruit those folks, and then they pay them to go through their training facility and their academy, and before they're able to go back on to go on patrol in the street. Correct. So
is,
it's whether you pay for our folks to go to academy or you do it in house, it's the same thing.
That is correct. And what was fortunate for Sheriff Chitwood is he already had the training staff, and there was a vacant building that he was able to get donations from the community to renovate it, and that's how he did it. That's the only way he's been able to almost maintain his staffing. We use Daytona State College predominantly. We were using St. John's River State College also. But pretty much that academy is fueling the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. And the one thing I didn't mention, just thought of, he's adding 25 deputy sheriffs in this next fiscal year too. So I'm hoping he's not going to come and steal from us because they did that when the school district went from guardians to deputies. I lost 4 school resource deputies to them. And, so we've got a good climate, we've got a good agency, a good community, but especially in inflation, money talks. And so I don't know, I already met with Sheriff Hardwick and told him that, because he was a police chief before he was sheriff, and told them that sheriffs don't recruit deputies from other agencies, so I would appreciate it if he would stop. I can't stop them from applying, but don't do your recruiting to each other. I said, I don't know how police chiefs operate, but that's how sheriffs operate.
Yeah.
It slowed it down. I don't know if that was just by accident or what.
Commissioners, anything else? Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, that concludes the workshop presentation for today. We continue to work on presenting the general fund budget based on the estimated value of property that's been provided to us. Our final numbers, as you know, won't be available until July 1st. We have our next workshop scheduled for Monday, June 19th, and that's when we're going to take a look at the general fund budgets and our capital funds. As the sheriff mentioned, we are working with the sheriff's office in the city of Palm Coast to develop a long-term funding strategy. We will be starting that discussion with a 5-year plan on July 13th. We're going to be meeting at the city of Palm Coast, and that's the city, county staff, as well as the sheriff. Internally, we have been meeting to talk about that moving forward. We're also going to be looking at your calendars, and we'll likely have to schedule a couple workshops in the month of July. I know we had one tentatively scheduled, I believe it was next week, or not next week, but the following week, but I think we've canceled that one for now. We've taken that off your calendar because there's a lot going on with Florida Association of Counties and some conflicts with dates, but that's it. That's all we had for you for today, unless you have any questions, comments.
Commissioners, any closing comments or?
No, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for the process. This is an enhancement from prior years, so thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, anything? But just a closing thing, it's probably the most important thing we do is the budget. Ms. Johnson collects the money, but we spend it. So it's really important that we do this correctly. And just as an overall comment, I'm very pleased with the amount of effort that's gone into the budget process. You guys have done a great job. Excuse me, a great job. Two things I'm concerned with. One is Katie's budget. I think we need to look at that pretty hard because it went up so much. I think we need to look at that. And the 5 deputies, I think we need to talk to you more about that and discuss among ourselves. Those are the only things. But I'm very pleased with the budget that you all have submitted. So it shows some really hard work. And even Sheriff, your budget, discounting the 5, it's a good budget. You've been very readable and understandable, and you justified the raises. So I think you all did a great job, okay? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh,
Thank
We're adjourned. Thank you.